Maybe give it another 30 seconds and then start. Okay, so I think we should probably make a start. Though others may well come in and join us as we get going. Thank you everybody for making it to this final session of the online day of the SRHE conference. I hope you've had a stimulating, enjoyable day, and it hasn't been too long a day either. In this final session, this is session 4.5. We have two papers due to be presented. Anna and Tamer are our two presenters this afternoon. That means we should have lots of time for discussion at the end, as well as we won't be having the full schedule of 3 papers, but equally we won't hold you here if we use up the time and have exhausted our conversation. I'm Harriet Barnes. I'm Director of Policy and Funding at the Higher Education and Funding Council for Wales, and I'm also a committee member of SRHE. So I'm here to chair the session, which I think is largely just making sure that everyone gets a chance to speak who wants to in the discussion sessions. But with no further ado, I very much like to hand over to Anna to start our first presentation, if that's right. So
thanks very much. Let me try to share my screen first to see if it works. Is it fine?
Yes.
Okay, great.
That's come up. That's great. Thank
you. Thank you very much. So, dear colleagues, good evening. It's evening here. I'm glad to be able to present a part of our research here at the International Conference. Let me just put it in a kind of context. So this is the middle part of what we are doing. We are doing a lengthy research on quality in online environment and what kind of parameters and criteria are actual and valid right now and how they change over time. So first part, it's out of scope today. First part was done like in the form of extensive research related to quality notion in online environment. So we kind of studied like how quality in offline works and what kind of practices and understandings are potentially transferable to online mode. So right now here we are talking about models quality assurance online, and we'll be mostly talking about models of internal quality assurance. Why we're doing that? Because here in Russia, we are like a little bit behind from, if we like take as an example, the USA, which like started their online programs, if I'm not mistaken, since like 2000, a little bit later, the year of 2000. So the official statistics here in Russia started registering online programs in universities right after pandemic, and it was fixed in year of 2021 as 93 all over Russia, and by 2022 it increased to 111. So we feel it's kind of going to be a trend, and practices of quality assurance will be topical. That's why we're doing that. So let's talk a little bit more about like what kind of previous research enhanced and motivated us to dive into quality concept and quality assurance practices online. So basically we've noticed, like right in our first paper, for example, the beginning of the research on quality notions, that worldwide practices and online programs started like their rapid growth since 2009. That's quite a while. And then there were like numerous tools developed and designed on how to assure quality here and there. And they were criticized mostly because they were either directly copied from offline mode, which was not that acceptable due to different specifics of these two. And the second type of tools or models of quality assurance, they were like single aspected, as to say. So What I mean is that they focused on one kind of aspect of educational process, for example, like teaching or technology or like etc., etc., etc. So actually pandemic, I know that everybody has been talking about pandemic a lot nowadays, but online did not start during pandemic, but pandemic actually highlighted like major problems that previously existing tools and instruments had, and get the universities and researchers all over the world to think more about how to assure quality more effectively and what actually quality in new online is. Because after pandemic, online kind of became like new online. It was not still the same. So this was a research motivation, and the questions we posed to ourselves before we started looking at the models were like how the models evolved, um, overlapping parameters. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the further slides. And how does this evolution of like tools and parameters of how to work with quality form the concept, if they do? So basically, the methodology was quite similar to all the kind of systematic or extensive literature reviews. So what we did, it's kind of extreme like situation actually for doing literature review here in Russia, because even at High School of Economics, who usually has like lots of access to international libraries, we are now mostly limited to Google Scholar. And before using that as main database, we actually made sure that it's possible to use, because we know that like there are lots of things over there and some of them are not that trustworthy. So we first made sure that it's okay to use Google Scholar for search of articles in social sciences, as education is a part of social sciences. And then as supplementary search, like databases for our search, we use the following ones, which are underlined. So we kind of combined them instead of using conventional Web of Science and Scopus. All in all, we use the keywords for our search. They are listed here, and they were like modified during the process of our search, which consisted of 5 steps. That was quite extensive. While we selected 13 models from 35 found articles, we kind of excluded the ones that were related to open universities that are quite popular, actually. There are lots of publications related to the universities that operate only online. And models that are not statistic models, that are not research model, and that are not case study. That was important. Then, as I said, we included those models that were working with internal quality assurance, and they were designed for working with online programs, not the course, because models for quality assurance of online courses, for example, MOOCs, they're quite popular. They're everywhere. But models for online programs, I don't know, it's fortunate or unfortunate, but they're quite rare. So as a result, as our data, we got like 13 models, 1 model for each year from 2009 to 2022. And for 2015, there was no relevant article found. We then used thematic analysis. So we treated publications in which models were described as qualitative data, and we started analyzing them from the point of view of a priori parameters. What is that? That means something we derived from the primary step of our research. So when we were like looking into what is quality online and how it compares with quality in offline environment, we kind of spotted different factors that are not the same. Okay, we could kind of expect that is a digital factor. That is for sure. Then student support, communication, and I'm sorry, I cannot like kind of see what is written to the right, but yeah, communication. And the fourth one that you could probably see. I'm not sure if you can though. So yeah, these 4 were kind of a priori parameters that we had before we started. Then The next set of parameters, they emerged during the process of our analysis. That means when we spotted similar thematic patterns in models description, we kind of thought, aha, here it is, put it in a list, and then went back again to the beginning, to the year of 2009, and looked throughout all the models again to make sure they contain this or that parameter. Because we kind of classified them in the end according to whether they were spotted in all the models or only in the part of them. That was how analysis was conducted. The next one, the results, what we actually got in the end. This table illustrates the frequency of parameters I've just mentioned. I think some of them colored in gray is that what I call a priori parameters. So that is what we brought into the analysis from our extensive literature review on quality notion at the first step. The yellow ones are a priori. That means they were derived during the analysis process. And we see that only, I think, 3 of them were the ones we saw in each and every model of our sampling: digital factor, student-centered design, teaching online. And it's interesting that 2 of them are a priori and 1 is a posteriori. Yeah, so there are 3. The next one, actually, according to the main characteristics of the models, in certain periods were identified and named them. So first period was called trial, and I think I'll characterize them a little bit later. Yeah, so trial, transitional, and modern period. If we talk about trial period, it's kind of like online is new, and there are different kind of models that help students and teachers adapt to online mode, like, for example, technology acceptance model, and they need to get used to LMS because they don't know what is that, they don't know how to use that, so they need time to get used to a new environment. It's interesting that students' experience, which is topical right now here, was first mentioned in models of that period. External standards and contexts, they are considered, but they are not incorporated into the models yet. For the second period, we call it transitional according to models characteristics. So it's like when the models of the first period, they became outdated. Like digital support is excessive, and students talk about that, and everybody got used to what is going on. So now there is a process of search for new solutions. And we can see here that actually some kind of indicators like student satisfaction, motivation, and well-being, which are also in trend nowadays, they start like arising here. Students' experience grows in importance. It's also an interesting feature. Models become more integrated with the context, and it's not for no reason. It's because they started being more data-based, right? The third period is called modern. And it's interesting because instead of getting like, clearer focus, which we could hope for, like, like single point, single aim, that did not happen. Instead, there were like noticed in the process of analysis that there are numerous aims. And what we found out was actually good because it allowed for some kind of individualization and tailoring the educational process to the students' needs. So that was a good thing, even though the aims were many. Students' experience becomes key element, and data-driven approach in models is a highlight, along with them being theoretically grounded. And the concept of culture working with data actually arises, and it correlates a lot with quality culture. Culture, which has been, I think, in trend since 2009, and nowadays, again, at least here, is in trend because the paradigm slowly shifts from external practices to internal again, which means working more with educational programs. I don't know, Harriet, would you assist me here how much time I have left? my presentation?
You've got at least another 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Thank you very much. Yeah, so let me see, because I actually have something to tell about each of the parameters, but if it's 5 minutes, we'd better talk about that if we have any questions in the discussion part. Let me just then jump into conclusion. So to connect with that colorful slide where we had gray and yellow lines, there were spotted two kind of parameters, variant and invariant. Variant parameters, they're present not in all of the models. And they kind of, the element that gives us room for flexibility and lets us adapt quality assurance tools and modes according to current needs, or maybe not current needs, but to combine the complex aspirations we need to consider while assuring quality online. On the other hand, invariant parameters were found to kind of form the core, in our opinion, of what is quality online, and something that is present in each and every model from 2009 to 2022. That is something, and in long-term run means that we have to use them to some extent while dealing with quality of online programs on the university level. And then general line of what we notice, how quality changed throughout the time period I have already mentioned, is that it moved from standardization, when quality was considered to be real quality, if it's according to standards, and teachers were told to work with materials and courses according to the standards. Then in the middle period, trial period, it became a little bit multi-directional. And then later, it ended up, at least right now, at the point of flexibility and individualization in line with educational programs, goals, and needs. Well, I think that's it. And I'm open for discussion. Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna. You've kept very much to time. And I hope we will have some chance to go back onto some of those slides you slipped over earlier. There's plenty of time for discussion, so hopefully we'll raise some questions about those. But open up for questions and comments from others in the room.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
So perhaps I could, let's go.
Yeah, just wanted to share my emails in case if there are some questions later on. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I was going to start by asking whether you felt the 13 studies that you managed to find through your search criteria seems quite a small pool, really. Were you surprised at how few studies you actually found looking at this?
Do you want me to comment, right, why that happened and whether we consider the sampling is too small? Well, on the other hand, yes, but on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, we were I don't know, we were honest with our research, and we narrowed down the scope. As I said, we wanted to just see the real tools for online programs. There are not many, seriously. And even for the year of 2015, considering we used Google Scholar and lots of other databases, there were no tools found. Well, what is the reason for that? Actually, something to think about. And we thought of extending this study, but we need to find another reason behind that, because if we extend, that means we need to get rid of one of the criteria we used for selection, and that changes the overall scope. So yeah, I don't know if I answered.
No, right. I think that, to me, is a sense an important point. There's a why is there so few? That raises its own question in itself, and both the evolution. So I think that's a really helpful point. Other questions or comments? Let's see.
You know what? While we're waiting for the questions, maybe like, another reason why there are so few models for ISAT, like, internal quality assurance programs, not courses, is maybe that we are talking more about the educational contexts and landscapes where online education is at the beginning stage, like here, and it's not that widespread. But for us, it was like really necessary to analyze what's going on, and the fact that such models exist still show that some of them are under demand. Yeah.
Would you perhaps, Anna, like to go back to the slide you passed over to make sure you're on time, and perhaps share some of the key findings from those? As there doesn't appear to be people jumping with questions, so this might stimulate a bit more debate.
Let's just talk a little bit about digital
Yeah.
part while we're waiting for more questions to arise. Yeah. So as I said, we identified 3 periods, right? And trial, transitional, and modern. And each of the factors, each of the parameters and its evolution were analyzed according to the 3 periods. As I already showed, the solution to the problem over here, from standardization to something multi-directional and then to flexibility and individualization, it's not a surprise here that digital factors actually changes accordingly. So for example, if we talk about trial period, it's time when in the model, there is something inbuilt like, forms, standards, guidelines, which teachers need to follow, and pedagogical designers needs to consider, academic directors of the programs, they have to think about that, and that is considered quality. We actually thought about it, what was the reason behind it, and maybe out of common sense, it's when you don't know something, it's better stick to something strict first to make sure it works well, and then you move on to something more diverse. Like here, in transitional period, it comes to variety of forms. When in the models, there are like variety of forms. And actually, which is interesting, in modern period, it comes to media content, which is in trend, where students and teachers are taught how to work with it, how to produce it. And it's not just, audio visual content, not just presentations, but it's kind of content that maybe even educational bloggers create. So they're taught on how to work with that because it's in trend. It's what the context is about right now. What else? We could talk about websites. Websites were mentioned throughout the models, of course, but the problem is, we thought, is not online specific because all kind of programs use websites, both online, offline. Then what we noticed later, that there were kind of wiki pages in the models that managers and directors of the programs could consider as alternatives to websites, which was good because for online education, communication is an issue. Students feel isolated, cut off from their peers, and kind of spaces like wiki pages, they allow certain space for communication and help overcome the psychological issue. Later, it leads to a space which we can call first variants of virtual environment, which is mentioned like in the next line. So different tools are used to organize all that variety of digital tools into something, one kind of space where students can interact, be there, store all of their resources. The digital footprint could be collected and analyzed. So there is a smooth transition from this cell to the next one, where we talk about virtual environment development, which is a key feature, I believe, for online programs, and it differentiates them from the courses, because for the courses, well, okay, you may need that, you may not need that, but on the level of university program, you gotta give students the feeling of belonging. If they don't feel that, there will be certain pressure on, like, in psychological terms. Yeah, that is about virtual environment. I don't know if there are any questions yet. on what I'm talking about?
There are a couple of questions. Yeah,
I think there are a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I was done that. Thank you. So the first question is from Sarah, and Sarah, perhaps might ask you to maybe ask your question directly, a little bit of clarification, if that's right, or I can read it out if you prefer for me to do that. But Sarah, if you're there, would you like to ask it?
Hi Anna, thank you for that. It was interesting to think about in how things are developing, and I was just wondering, is it that when you were saying about the small number of studies available, is it that it's internal quality assurance processes sort of are happening, but they're just not accessible, in terms of published, or, is it sort of an in-house type activity that sort of tends to happen? Or is it just that there isn't, it's just, it intrigues me, that's all. It's really interesting to see that there seems to be a bit of a gap possibly there. And I understand the reason why you didn't, choose, why you discounted some things for the methodology. So I just wondered, whether it's just that in-house. It's made me think about, well, what is the quality assurance for the stuff that we have in our institution? And I don't really know the answer to that question either, because but yeah, so it's made me think. But thank you.
Sarah, thanks very much for your question. And actually, we thought about it right in the middle of our search process, where at the beginning, we kind of considered open sources and tried to look for kind of internal practices that universities might use for assuring quality of their online programs. But when it came to it, like to real things, well, they were either that massive that you could not process them, and I doubt whether they're really in use, because I think it's impossible, because they're like huge and they're not structured. They're very hard to analyze. I think we found a couple of them in Africa. And then later, when we were stuck here, I was a member of ICD organization that time. I think all of you heard of it. It's like International Council of Distance Education based in Norway. So I talked to one of the board members, which is specialist in quality in online, like, what is the matter? And she said that, okay, first of all, the problem is that if we talk about internal practices, the context in which they're used could be either too volatile, and that is why it's huge and unstructured, because people just don't know how to use it yet, how to adapt it. Or it is already at that stage where they are not shared at the level of university or university website, but they are part of like international reports or something like that. So it's hard to classify them as internal practice at that point or external practice. I don't know if I answered right, but yeah, that's what happened. Thanks very much for asking them.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, made me think. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a second question from UA Mathers. Victor, would you like to ask the question, or shall I read it out for Sarah?
Sure, I think it links to the previous speaker. So a lot of that is internal, but certainly in the UK, the QA has guidelines on distance learning. And so it's framed by a national body, and especially around the pandemics, there were new ones coming out. But I think when you look at internal, certainly my experience was that when you ask a face-to-face teacher to teach online, the initial step is that they teach online as they would teach face-to-face, and that doesn't really work.
Oh yeah.
In my institution, we actually brought in or developed a unit by itself that looks at the distance learning part, and I think Dundee has done something similar, which is more the open university level. That's why my suggestion is looking at the OU level, so distance learning institutions, and how they quality assure, because those might be models that we could emulate in non-distance learning institutions.
Thank you very much. So you're talking about open universities, right?
Yeah.
We also kind of thought of it, but what do you think? Yeah, at the level of discussion now. So because they're not quite the same as traditional universities. And I think the way they operate, it differs a lot. So that is why we did not take their practices, even though there are plenty of in like peer-reviewed journals and all kind of like resources. They're easier to find. You're right. But whether they're the same, it's a big question, right?
It demonstrates the gap, I think, because there's a, whatever we call it, traditional university, face-to-face university would try to deliver online like the Open University would. And having, you know, but the gap is that we're not set up like this.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. That's a point to think about.
Are there any other questions, other reflections? Any other reflections you'd like to share, Anna, based on the comments you've had as well?
I think it was like a really nice discussion, and I would like to thank everyone for participating. I found at least 2 points for like further consideration. I'll note them down, think again. It's never too late to go back to the middle of your research and think again, right? So it's good time to do that.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm glad it's been useful. Well, thank you very much, Anna. Virtual round of applause for Anna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In which case then, shall we move on to our second speakers? I think I spotted also as well as Timo, there is Rico is also here, so I will hand over to you to present as you planned.
I will hand over to Tamer, who will be leading our presentation, but we are both here for your questions afterwards.
Thank you.
Right.
Tamer.
Thank you, Rika. Right. Thanks everyone for having us talk about our research on examining the impact of teaching on and learning online for medical trainers and trainees in the East of England Deanery. So we have been commissioned by the NHS to conduct this theory-led evaluation, and this project was done under the supervision of Professor Rika Hoffman, who was the PI of the project, of course, with the help of my colleagues listed here. All right, so let me start by some context on how what led to the creation of this project and the motivation behind it. So, as you would imagine, during the pandemic, there was a peak in hospitalization, which led to pausing all of face-to-face educational activities and a rapid transfer to in-person, to online environments were feasible. And we perceived this as an experience or a natural experiment, and we were thinking like how we can go forward from this natural experiment to get the lessons learned and how to go forward with online learning in the future, especially within the context of medical education. So the key questions of this theory-led evaluation was first to explore what were the trainers and the trainees' perspectives on the newly introduced blended learning platform. And second is to understand the challenges and the enablers that affected teaching and learning on the blended learning platform in the East of England Deanery. So first, we started with reviewing the studies that investigated the benefits and the challenges of online teaching and learning, especially within the field of medical education during the pandemic. And we found like some patterns. So for example, the flexibility in provision in terms of time and space were one of the key benefits, higher attendance. And this is probably due to the flexibility in provision, like availability of materials and so on. Some also faculty or lecturers used innovative teaching practices that they could have not managed to practice in face-to-face teaching. However, there were some challenges on the other hand, like for example, poor infrastructure, poor technical skills, especially related to online teaching, lower motivation by both the students and the lecturers, as well as lower social interactions, which have been associated with COVID and restricted movements, of course. All right, so let me introduce the sequence of the evaluation and our justification for that. So we started with screening the existing courses. Okay, so we chose a sample of 103 courses from 2 of the specialties that were using the platform in a high rate. Okay, so we manually screened these courses, and I will show you later the results of that. Then we formed focus groups with the trainers to understand their perceptions of online teaching and the benefits and challenges that face them. Our results then fed into the development of the trainee survey and the trainer survey to understand and to do the quantitative analysis. And both surveys were also informed by the literature, which is outlined here in the slide. Finally, we ended up with a focus groups with the trainees to understand their responses and understand more like the responses to the surveys. So as you can see here, there was such a high variability among the courses that we screened. And as you can see here, for example, some courses included description, while others did not include any description. So these are some screenshots from the blended learning platform. While the majority of the content was actually pre-recorded lectures. So a lot of the lecturers were using the platform as a library of resources, right? Just recording the lectures using PowerPoint or whatever and uploading this. This was good in terms of providing, access to the materials, but as you would expect, none of them had any features of peer-to-peer interaction or peer-to-instructor interaction. Also, we noticed that only 10% of the content was interactive. And by interactive, we mean having links where students can move to further resources, or at least, can choose the sequence of their learning rather than being, have to listen to 90 minutes or more of recorded lectures. In terms of assessment, most of the courses included summative assessment, more than formative assessment. However, only 32% actually included summative assessments. And then we further provided or analyzed the feedback. So 32% of those summative assessments provided feedback to the trainees, and only 18% of which was helpful. And by helpful feedback, I mean, for example, telling the students what was wrong with the response or how to include it, how to improve it further. While feedback that was not helpful was basically telling them that their answer is not correct and not giving them any hints or further information. All right, so let's move now to the findings from the surveys. So this graph shows a comparison between the trainers and the trainees' perceptions to the questions that we asked. And the trainers' responses are shown in blue, while the trainees are shown in orange. So let's look into more details. So development of clinical skills, as you can see, both groups did not rate their development of clinical skills through the blended learning platform highly. Through the focus groups, we were told by trainers that they were more skeptical about the ability to develop clinical skills using blended learning platform. And this was evident, especially for hands-on skills such as surgery, for example. Others saw the benefits and experimented the use of virtual simulations, for example, using lungs or virtual organs to train the students. Then we were interested in understanding the nature of the teaching and learning experience. And as you can see here, both groups struggled with motivating themselves to either teach or study online. Both groups found it to be a lonely experience, while we had a discrepancy in rating the interaction with the trainers and with each other. So for example, only 5% of the trainers thought that they had sufficient interaction with the trainees, which might affect why they rated their clinical skills here, the difference in rating their clinical skills, because basically they could not interact with them. They did not have ways like to observe them and assess them in a more objective way. In understanding the discrepancy, again, we asked trainers like why they think their interaction was not sufficient, and they told us that the trainees do not know what they are missing. And by that, they are referring to the casual interaction with the trainees, like having coffee together or sitting for lunch and so on. And they perceive these non-formal interactions as very beneficial, especially to the development of non-technical skills, which Rika discussed in her lecture this afternoon. And they think that these interactions are very beneficial for their career planning as well. We think that COVID could possibly had an impact on the motivation and loneliness of either like teaching or the learning experience online. On a more positive note, we can see that both groups agreed that online learning shall play a more prominent role in the future. And through our regression analysis, we found that this was predicted by the flexibility that blended learning offered. So we can see that blended learning, that the blended learning offered flexibility, which predicted the trainees' preference for more provisions in the future. Interestingly, platform features did not predict their preference for future online learning, while lecturers' experience in online teaching was a strong predictor. So this is giving us an idea about, what are the elements that predicted their preference for online learning. And it seems that platform features are important, as I will discuss later, but are not the key or the only factor. Like lecture experience in this case was more significant statistically. Finally, we asked what predicts trainees' perceptions of their learning efficacy. So we asked them like, how do they rate their perception of learning efficacy, right? And we found that flexibility of online learning in alignment with the literature is highly valued, but that's not enough. Like that's not telling us the whole story. So it appears that other elements such as course features, for example, clear course description, how frequent the materials are updated online, trainers' online teaching experience, again, are important predictors for their perceived learning efficacy. Interestingly, self-reported motivation and self-regulation were even stronger predictors than course features. And again, this is telling us something related to the importance of motivation. And it's not only course features, yes, they are important, and the lecturer's experience is also important. But again, self-reported motivation and self-regulations are important as well. And this led us to the following questions. So then, what predicted their self-reported motivation? What predicted their motivation to study online? So it was very interesting to find that trainers' expertise in online teaching and their interactivity with the trainees were the key predictors of motivation. So again, it wasn't course features. Okay, it was the trainer's interaction and experience in online teaching. And by its role, then, motivation predicted perceived learning efficacy, as I mentioned, and their overall satisfaction with their learning experience. And we think this is giving us a very interesting story where it is showing us that it's not only one side or the other, as I will discuss later, but it is showing us like these elements are codepending on each other. So the trainer's online teaching experience is predicting learning efficacy, and it's also predicting the trainer's motivation. So I'd like to end up with some implications and the associated resource requirements. So in this slide, we kind of list the benefits and challenges on two ends of the spectrum. So in one end of the spectrum, we talk about inherent benefits, which we found in alignment with the literature, like, for example, flexibility of the time giving, flexibility of place, like learners are able to access the material at any time, at their convenience, at any place. They do not have to travel. They told us, which was especially important for, like those with caring duties, accessibility. So these were inherent benefits. On the other side, we discussed inherent challenges and whether they are inherent or could be even improved with technology. Like, for example, lack of one-to-one support from trainers during learning, lack of peer support, lack of networking opportunities, and the casual interactions that took place between trainers and the trainees. Then we divide the benefits into contingent benefits, which are available, but we need to be more conscious about, and we need to keep these resources. So, for example, access to experts from other hospitals. This was one of the valued benefits of online teaching. So they don't have to travel to these hospitals. They can have these experts talking to them from different hospitals. Admin-related issues, access to pre-course materials. So these were all existing benefits, but need to be supported, and we need to be more careful on keeping these challenges. Then we just, benefits. And then we have two types of challenges. One of them are low resource challenges and then high resource challenges. So an example of low resource challenges would be, for example, organizing the platform and updating materials more regularly. Okay, increasing the awareness of the existing materials to all the trainees, right? And giving access to trainers to access the blended learning platform. So these are the low resource challenges. On the other side, high resource challenges would include improving the quality of blended teaching. And by quality of blended teaching, we are referring to elements of interaction, whether with the trainers or with their peers. And this is linked, as we have seen from the analysis, with the trainer's motivation, the trainee's motivation, and it had a negative effect on the loneliness of the experience. Finally, I would like to end up with some conclusions. So we think that from the analysis, we can see that a more prominent role for blended learning in medical education is welcomed by both groups, the trainers and the trainees. And this is not to say that we are, or that they hope to replace face-to-face provision, but this would go alongside well-designed face-to-face provision. We have also seen that lectures, interaction, and expertise in online teaching plays a major role in students' motivation, their learning efficacy, and their overall satisfaction and even desire for future online learning. So we think this could, more resources could be put into developing this and supporting them. So this takes us to the following point, which is the pedagogical and technological support, which are needed to support the motivation of trainers and trainees who equally need support to continue to teach and learn online effectively. Finally, while some of these identified improvements can be implemented with limited resources, as we just discussed, others are resource intensive. So thus they necessitate the important strategic decisions of resourcing and trade-offs while we think about them, such as the improvement of the online provision and training. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamer, again for another excellently timed presentation, very well on time, and really interesting findings there. So please raise hands or put questions in the chat. There's lots there to reflect on. So while others are perhaps thinking about their questions, maybe I could kick off with a question perhaps about, do you think there was learning kind of going as we went along? Because obviously this was an evaluation in a particular circumstance and a particular period of time.
Right.
Do you think some of those lessons, the trainers particularly, were perhaps learning as they went along, and things might have evolved if they'd had a bit longer to get used to it?
Yeah, I think that's the case. Again, one of the key challenges with this was the rushed implementation, right? So that's why I introduced the context of having to the transition to online learning in this such rushed manner in response to COVID, right? So yeah, one of the key things that emerged was that if trainers had more sufficient time, this would have possibly impacted their motivation and their preparation as well for the online transition. Yes.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat. You and Matthias, would you like to ask your question directly rather than me read it out?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, funny light there. Just wanted to check, you're talking about a blended learning platform. What is in the blend and how the relationship is between online learning and what happens face to face or in practice? So what is in the blend? So when you at the very beginning of your presentation, you showed how the platform is used, and that seemed to indicate it's more a repository, which is quite common for VLEs pre-pandemic. But during the pandemic, most of us had to go completely online for a period of time, which means it needed to do more than just being a repository. So I just wanted to know what is in the blend and where you want to take the blend, so to speak.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I will add my thoughts and then we can hear from Rika. So based on the screening exercise and our focus groups, we noticed very high variability across specialties. So some of them were depending totally on the blended learning platform, right? So again, as you mentioned, it was used as a form of repository, while others would have exceptional clinical sessions where it would be permitted, especially in the time of COVID. So again, it highly varied, but again, the use of the platform itself was used as I mentioned, like a library of resources, basically the recorded lectures. Some of them would have guest lecturers, as I mentioned, like experts from other hospitals talking to them. But again, it wasn't how we would like to see, for example, in a virtual learning environment. Yeah, Rika, if you would like to add anything to that.
Sorry, I was trying to pull the internet. Yeah, really, I wanted to comment on the second part. So absolutely, firstly, Harriet, and thank you so much for sharing our presentation, Tamer. So Harriet, I think it's absolutely right that this was a special time also where other opportunities were limited. So it was not the same kind of options that we have now. And in person was not an option. So I think we need to be really cautious and directly applying the findings in a post-pandemic context. In terms of the role of the blended and what's not blended, what seems to us from looking at the data, I think that was Matthias who was asking that question, is that there is real appetite from both the trainees and trainers in healthcare context of retaining a remote or an online element, particularly due to the nature of people's work being physically in hospital settings, particularly in the eastern region in the UK, which has incredibly poor transport infrastructure. So while it looks like quite a small part of the world, it's very, very difficult to get around. And of course, people are very tied in their clinical settings. So our thinking going forward is really that whatever the way the blended element is going to be used going forward, whether it's more for the kind of flipped classroom video type elements, which then get discussed in an in-person class, or whether it's more for actually having live interactive sessions online, we think in any case, it's particularly the face-to-face provision which needs rethinking in that context. And often when we think about blended learning or online learning, the discussions and healthcare context are around what should the blended look like and what should the remote look like. But given that in healthcare context, we are in a setting where people are spread often on placement, students are spread around different hospitals in a wide geographical area, it's thinking, how do we make best use of that in-person time as well? So I don't want to take more time, but I wonder whether that adds a little bit to what you were asking about.
Thank you, Rika. Yes, I think that's really helpful see, and it's a very important consideration, as you say, both in the context of health provision, but I can also appreciate what you're saying about the particular geography that you were dealing with here, and that's certainly would be applicable elsewhere as well, but it is an important point. Anna, you've indicated you have a question you'd like to raise. Would you like to bring them up?
Yeah, thanks very much. It was like a pleasure to listen to your talk. I'd like to link my first question to what Rika has just said. So to what extent consider blended to be blended? And do you think that how much we blend actually depends on what kind of problems of online mode we want to solve? For example, in other words, an issue of loneliness is a problem online, right? But by shifting it a little bit to offline mode, we let trainers and trainees interact more. One option, right? And it is blended now. Or maybe like time saving for medical professionals is a benefit of online, so we keep it like this. So in other words, do you think how much we blend depends on what kind of problems of online mode we want to solve?
So I would, Rika, would you like to go?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I will. Yeah, so I think I would agree with you. It would depend would depend on the problems we want to solve, and also importantly with the specialty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, in medical settings, the specialties varies a lot, and the use of the blended learning platform varies a lot according to the specialty.
Mm-hmm.
So while some, for example, students are happy with the idea of having a repository, others want to use it as more like hands-on, for example, simulations, for example, or whatever. And again, maybe from our side, it's not good to have a repository or having like a video of recorded lectures, right? But for them, it's very important because this could help them, revise for their exams, for example, or attend lectures that they could not attend. So again, it's getting into these details of the practical sense of their specialty and how they use the blended learning platform for the best of their development, or not only of clinical skill, but also of their theoretical knowledge as well. Rika, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And the other thing, and I'd be very keen to hear if other people in this session have similar or different views. I think the other thing is separating kind of the political from what research evidence can argue. So the question we often get asked in the context of our work by medical educators is, what should we do going forward? Should we do remote or should we do in person? Or if we do blended, what should be the proportions? And I guess my view as an academic is that it's not a question research can answer. It's really about what it is that we want to do and what it is that we want to achieve and what the resources are. But I think what research can answer is that, first of all, in as much as material has already been generated en masse during the pandemic, it'd be very silly from a resource perspective not to utilize that, given that evidence suggests that it can be used in a way that can support learning, but that if we want to do it in a way that doesn't alienate those students who are already struggling most, something needs to be added around what's currently there. So that might be interactive online elements, interactive in-person elements, some kind of interaction around it. Secondly, I think where there is reasonably good, there's not a huge amount of good, strong evidence in terms of medical education and educational methods that work, but where there is reasonable evidence is around a flipped classroom model. So that might then be that what's there in the blended platform is going to be used more in the kind of way that was suggested earlier, sort of a repository, the set of material that students engage with in advance of classes, and then class time is not used for teaching, but all of it for interaction. I think the last thing that I think our study and the focus groups with the trainees in particular suggest that, especially in postgraduate contexts, what's really key in the in-person sessions is not just what's being taught, but the opportunity to network with other students, which even that could be done in online settings. I mean, we are doing something of the kind right now with one another. but particularly of the opportunity of the emergent, and Tamara may have an example, but of the emergent conversations that are not on the topic. If you've just encountered a really difficult issue on your placement and you want to talk about it with someone to get emotional support, or hear how someone else has dealt with it or dealt with the affective fallout, to be able to have those conversations at the start of class, at the end of class, on your way to the loo, you know, what have you. And those kinds of opportunities are important to have the opportunity for, and happens a lot less online. So for me, the question going forward really is, what are the key benefits of the remote, you know, and who are the people who particularly benefit? What are the key elements on in-person, and what are the things that go missing if we don't have the in-person? And then from that perspective, working out for different groups of students what a reasonable balance of the two might be. But I'd be really keen to hear if other people in this session have different views or experiences, either based on their research or based on their higher education practice, perhaps. If I'm allowed to put a question to the room.
Absolutely, yes, please do. Are there any people who'd like to comment based on their experiences, or indeed any other research findings in other disciplines, other countries, other contexts?
I'd like to comment that actually in our university, which is like a leading hub for online programs, there are more postgraduate online programs, which is not surprising, maybe. And what Rika has just said about that, at postgraduate level, it's not about what is being taught, but the knowledge that emerges. I think it has something to do with the level of education. And yeah, it's another point that we'll take up. It's actually very, very interesting. People are more interested in postgraduate studies online than undergraduate in our context.
I can also draw some of the examples that we heard from them during the focus group. So they were telling us that one of the key aims of the teaching sessions in face-to-face provision is to get around with their peers, and not only networking, but also to hear from them about, you know, like, how did this course go? What are your recommendations? Like getting recommendations from even like more senior colleagues. And this has been very helpful to them, like getting feedback on previous courses and so on. So these kind of emotional support and building expertise within the peers network was also very highly valuable for them. Yeah, thank you.
In our experience, it mostly comes from the fact that people come into postgraduate programs held in online mode. They all have different backgrounds, and sometimes they have some kind of work experience already.
Right.
And they would really like not just to learn, but to teach others, as you said, interact, network, but also share what they can do, skills, knowledge, etc.
Yes.
Are there other experiences that people would like to share? Yes.
Yeah, so I've done some research into interaction online, and the different types of interactions all have pros and cons. So when you look at synchronous interaction, that's more immediate, it's more engaging often, but you have the problem that not everyone can be online at the same time. Asynchronous, there's always a delay if you use the discussion boards and things like this. It's not as immediate, and there's a question about how much volume you have that people have to read. So finding a good balance to cater for different learner engagement, different learner types, means that that was at least a finding, that you have students engaging synchronously, asynchronously, and maybe just in the contents. They all perform well. So there's not really an issue with performance, but the deficit is, as you have highlighted, is that social interaction, the social space, and that's really difficult to create online. So there are studies around learning communities and communities of practice, and but it's really not easy to create that, especially when you have these different engagement patterns. So I think having a blend, in the sense that you have the online provide opportunities for students to engage, but also have that social space physically face-to-face would probably work best.
Thank you. That's really helpful and interesting to see. Lessons learned from other circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one reflection that struck me from something you said, Tamar, was about some of the things that we as educators perhaps might think are good or bad, that we think are perhaps just a repository isn't particularly good. But on the other hand, there are students or trainees who actually, for whom that is useful and who that is valuable. And that just made me think about Anna's presentation about the QA of online learning and whether it's possible through the quality assurance process to balance those two things about what is good provision versus what is the student need. And is that a challenge that we can resolve? Can we get at both those things?
Yeah, exactly. We were also struck by this finding because from our perspective, using an online system, that was well developed only for posting lectures, recorded lectures was to us maybe too boring, but for them it was highly valuable, right? Because they can use these materials in reviewing for their exams, they can have it and so on. And this was not the only instance. We have multiple instances where there was variability between, for example, how trainers rated the trainees' clinical skills and how the trainees rated their own clinical skills, right? So again, there is a kind of variability between how we see them as lecturer educators and how they see themselves. And also with the interaction, right? That's another instance. We can see the high variability among both groups, and trainers saying, they do not know what they are missing. But the trainees who were only, have been subjected to the training in the middle of the pandemic, they do not know how it looks like otherwise. So they were too used to learning in mid-COVID, and they were happy with the interaction. Not necessarily happy, but they were definitely more satisfied with the interaction that they were receiving than the trainees' perceptions of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that point of what you don't know what you're missing is a really important one, I think, in interpreting these findings as well.
Yeah.
Yes, don't know anything different. Okay, are there any other questions or comments or experiences that anyone would like to share on either of the two presentations? I think we've seen an interesting complementarity between various dimensions of the issues of online and blended provision. Last opportunity for any further questions or comments. Not seeing anyone jumping in. If that's the case, then I think perhaps we'll draw the session to a close. Thank you again hugely to our speakers, to Anna and to Tamar and to Rika as well. Thank you all very much for coming along, say, at the end of this long day. I hope you found that useful and stimulating, and there'll be a chance for you to get in touch with each other offline. Offline opportunities, not just speaking to each other in person, networking. And I'll remind you that the final session of the day is at 17:45, 5:45. Some final closing reflections from SRHE. But if we could just conclude then with our final round of applause and virtual thanks to all of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.